Let's dive right in, beginning with legal news. Former President Donald Trump is blasting a revised indictment against him as shocking and as a direct assault on democracy. Trump fired off that response on social media late yesterday, just hours after he was indicted, once again, over his efforts to overturn his 2020 presidential election loss. That effort culminated in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Yesterday, special counsel Jack Smith filed a superseding indictment, which was voted on and returned by a new federal grand jury. It included the same 4 charges that Trump faced in the original indictment, which was filed last August. They include conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights, Caddy.
Yeah, so this revised indictment is intended to deal with the Supreme Court's decision back in July that Trump had broad immunity from charges relating to any official acts as president. And while the charges are the same, some of the evidence has been essentially whittled down in light of that ruling. Specifically, the indictment removes all references to Trump's attempts to use the Justice Department to advance his claim of election fraud, and is written in such a way to highlight that Trump was a candidate for office, something courts have recognized in the past to be private conduct, even if that candidate happens to be the current incumbent. A source familiar with the Trump defense team tells NBC News this revised indictment was, quote, not a surprise, but the team did not necessarily expect it to be filed yesterday. Joining us now, former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, thank you for joining us. I know you covered this every day at the time. When you look at this revised indictment, does it satisfy the conditions that the Supreme Court put on the idea that president cannot be tried for official acts? Has Jack Smith managed to thread that needle?
You know, Caddy, anybody who tells you definitively yes or no that he's threaded that needle hasn't read the Supreme Court decision very carefully. That Supreme Court decision lacks a lot of guidance to lower courts as well as to the special counsel's office, because it says that a president is entitled to presumptive immunity for his official acts, but it doesn't necessarily define with precision what's official or even how the special counsel could rebut that presumption. And it also says the presumption of immunity is rebuttable for now, suggesting that the Supreme Court could revisit that issue even on this superseding indictment. That having been said, I think Jack Smith and his team made a very good faith effort to pare down the indictment and particularly take out a number of allegations, not just pertaining to the Department of Justice, which was the one concrete thing that the Supreme Court said was off limits, but also to recast certain of the allegations in a way that would comport with the Supreme Court's ruling. One example that I'll give to you is, for example, the Supreme Court said that presidential communications are usually things that are within his official duties, but there may be circumstances in which the president, using Twitter, was talking mostly as a candidate or even in his personal capacity. You see now in this revised indictment at the very front, Jack Smith and his team acknowledging that while Trump may have used Twitter on occasion for official purposes, for the most part, he was using his tweets for purely personal, unofficial purposes, trying to reframe the former president's use of Twitter so that by the time they get to January 6th and some of the tweets that are at issue in this indictment, they've already really done the work to say, this isn't a guy who's communicating with people as commander-in-chief. He's communicating with his candidate hat on, and therefore it's on limits, not off.
So, Lisa, with so much uncertainty as to the fate of this indictment, let's talk about what comes next. I assume an appeal of some sort from the Trump campaign. Walk us through some next steps here, and the best you can, what a timetable might look like, because, of course, as any criminal indictment or criminal matter involving Donald Trump has to be looked at through the prism of an election year.
Absolutely. And I think, John, for people who are expecting some sort of resolution before the election, this is yet another unsatisfying step. But Jack Smith and his team are taking the long view here. They are trying to, as you noted at the beginning, preserve as much of their case as possible with an eye toward eventually trying a case against the former president if they are able to. And that means no rush. What I think will likely happen next is we'll see motion practice where the Trump people will get an opportunity to say this does not comport with the Supreme Court's ruling, and that they'll move to dismiss this superseding indictment. So in a way, we're going back to square one. But again, Jack Smith and his team are taking the long view. On a longer time horizon, they'd rather do it right than do it rushed. And this revised indictment is a reflection of that.
Okay, so meanwhile, in an interview that aired last night on CBS News, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was asked about the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling.
In your dissent, you wrote that the court declared for the first time in history that the most powerful official in the United States can, under circumstances yet to be fully determined, become a law unto himself. It sounds like a warning.
Well, I mean, that was my view of what the court determined.
You were concerned about broad immunity.
I was concerned about a system that appeared to provide immunity for one individual under one set of circumstances, when we have a criminal justice system that had ordinarily treated everyone the same.
So, Mike, there's little debate about where Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson would come down on this particular ruling and on her desire, perhaps, to get that immunity ruling limited, as she said just there. I guess the question is going to be for Jack Smith. Has he put together a new case that would satisfy some of the more conservative members of the court and allow him to go ahead with the case as it's now written?
Well, it seems to me, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but it seems to me that what Jack Smith did was basically edit the original indictment, pared it down for approval to get under the wire of the Supreme Court decision. But I think there's another aspect to this that is on the minds of more than a few people. A couple of aspects. One is Merrick Garland's running his tutelage over the Justice Department. Why did it take so long to get this case moving? We are coming up on 4 years passage of time from January 6, 2021. And here we are still in the weeds of legal back and forths. And the key word, I think, out in the public, Lisa, when they think of this case is the word again. Donald Trump indicted again. And you can feel the shoulders of the average voter just shrugging and moving on because of that word again and the timeless factor of this investigation and indictment process.
I can understand, Mike, how folks at home might feel a sense of fatigue or exhaustion by hearing that word again. And I would encourage people to, instead of looking at this as a wholly new indictment, to look at it as an attempt to comply with the Supreme Court. It's not anti-democratic. In fact, this is the way it's supposed to function. Whether or not we think that the Supreme Court's ruling was legitimate, Jack Smith and his team are trying their darndest to comply with it. And that includes bringing this case before a new grand jury so that Trump and his lawyers couldn't complain that a grand jury that had heard impermissible evidence was the one that passed judgment on this new winnowed down indictment. This is their effort to cross all their T's, dot all their I's, and really preserve this case for the long haul, even if, as you say, we are here where we are because of some delay on the Justice Department's part in the first place.
Yeah, delay from the DOJ and also by legal maneuverings from the Trump team, where they have now had 3 of their 4 cases almost certainly push back beyond the election. But we should note his sentencing in New York still, at least for now, is scheduled to be held in a couple of weeks. So we will see what happens there. We really appreciate MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin for starting us off this morning. Lisa, thank you. And as we mentioned, Donald Trump reacted to yesterday's superseding indictment with real anger. In a series of posts on Truth Social, Trump railed against the revised filing, incorrectly arguing that the Supreme Court had granted him full immunity. He called it an attempt to interfere with the election, a direct assault on democracy, unprecedented abuse, and the single greatest sabotage of our democracy in history. We can do plenty of fact-checking there. Trump also wrote this It is DOJ policy that the Department of Justice should not take any action that will influence an election within 60 days of that election. Of course, though, Trump is the one who has continuously sought to delay the trial until after the election. We should also note he benefited from DOJ action ahead of the 2016 election when FBI Director Comey reopened an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Now, speaking from the campaign trail yesterday, Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, weighed in.
I don't think that it changes anything legally. I think it's clearly an effort to try to do more election interference from Jack Smith. He should be ashamed of himself, and it's one of the reasons why we have to win, because he should not be anywhere near power.
Simone, the hypocrisy here is just off the charts. As noted, not only did Trump benefit from a DOJ maneuvering back in 2016, he himself has been indicted for election interference for what happened in 2020 and then January 6th. And now he and his running mate are claiming that that's what's happening to them. So looking at this through the political lens, how much do you think this will matter? And certainly it matters in terms of right or wrong. It matters in terms of the rule of law. But how much do you think it matters for voters?
Look, I do think it matters for voters, Jonathan, but if you look at all of the, not just the polling, but the focus groups, and in talking to voters, what they say would matter most is whether or not he was convicted, a trial actually happening. And when it comes to that, we're not going to see a trial now prior to Election Day, given the Supreme Court rulings and coupled with Donald Trump's delay tactics. So I do think, though, it's really important, and you've seen the Harris campaign do more of this, and Democrats writ large. And in this 9th hour, 11th hour almost, it's going to be very critical to talk very specifically about what exactly has happened. Just to push back on J.D. Vance and others who would assert that this is election interference, to not allow them to twist and make up a narrative that does not exist. Because the reality of the situation is that Donald Trump has been charged for crimes, essentially, that he committed years ago. But because of the slow nature of our justice system, this is a conversation we are still having. But the idea that this is all made up and that Democrats just did this is something that there is a subset of the electorate that is, susceptible to. So Democrats are going to have to be aggressive in speaking just the facts.